Chapter 1. Nightfall's Curse. The night was unusually still in the small town of Millwood, a hush hanging over the streets like a shroud. Street lamps cast long shadows that twisted and writhed on the pavement as if alive. It was under this cloak of darkness that the figure known only as Adam, the creation of Stephen Lestat's dark, necromantic experiments, made its silent entrance into civilization. Adam's steps were slow and deliberate, its form barely discernible in the dim light, a spectre of death meandering through the unsuspecting town. The faintest sound of its dragging footfalls blended with the whisper of the wind, creating a symphony of ominous tones. Every touch of its gnarled, pale hand left behind more than just the chill of the grave. It carried a virulent curse. The first to encounter Adam was a late-night worker, Jimmy, who was taking out the trash behind the local diner. The back alley offered perfect concealment as Adam approached, its movements suddenly swift, predatory. Jimmy turned at the soft rustle, just in time to meet the hollow gaze of his assailant. Before he could scream, Adam's cold hands were upon him, its bite quick and lethal, sinking into his neck with unnatural ease. Jimmy's eyes widened in terror and pain, then dimmed as the life was drained from him, his body slumping to the ground, only to rise again moments later, his features now mirroring the ghastly visage of his attacker. As Adam moved deeper into the town, each encounter was brief but horrific. A young couple walking home from a late movie screamed into the night as they were ambushed. Their screams turned into guttural growls as they too succumbed to the transformation, rising as new bearers of the undead plague. The contagion spread silently at first, then with growing momentum as the newly turned undead found victims of their own. The quiet night erupted into chaos. Distant screams and the sounds of struggle began to echo through the streets. Lights in homes flickered on, faces appearing at windows, eyes wide with confusion and horror at the scenes unfolding in the darkness below. Local authorities, alerted by frantic calls, arrived on the scene, only to be overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability and horror of the assault. Officer Daniels, responding to what he believed was a simple disturbance, found himself face to face with what looked like scenes from a horror film. His flashlight beam landed on figures that seemed human but moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Approaching one, he reached out to assist, only to recoil in horror as the figure snapped at him, revealing a mouth of bloodied teeth. Radioing for backup, his voice broke with panic. We need more help here. Something's terribly wrong." The infection was merciless and efficient. With every minute that passed, more shadows rose to join the ranks of the undead, driven by a relentless hunger. Millwood, once a quiet and peaceful town, was quickly transforming into a landscape of nightmares, a harbinger of the dark days to come, as the shadow of undeath spread its wings over the unsuspecting world. The Siege of Millwood. As the situation in Millwood rapidly deteriorated into a nightmare, the military intervened, drafting units into the town in a desperate attempt to stem the tide of undead. Captain Harris, an experienced officer, known for his cool head in crisis situations, was put in charge of the operation. His team, heavily armed and briefed on the dire circumstances, rolled into town as dawn broke, revealing the full horror of the night's events. The streets were apocalyptic scenes straight out of a horror movie, filled with wandering undead. Homes were barricaded, with the desperate cries of trapped citizens echoing through the air. Captain Harris quickly assessed the situation, his voice crisp over the radio. "Secure a perimeter, weapons ready. Anything that comes this way, take it out." The soldiers swiftly set up a makeshift border who was in military vehicles and barbed wire, but just as they were finishing, a wave of shambling undead moved towards them. "Open fire," Captain Harris commanded. The sound of gunfire roared through the morning air, bullets tearing into the advancing horde. The undead fell in heaps, but to the soldiers' horror, many began to rise again, undeterred. "Headshots only," Harris shouted, adjusting his orders in real time. But even as his team adapted, the sheer number of attackers began to overwhelm their defenses. Amidst the chaos, Captain Harris noticed a large group of undead breaking off from the main horde, moving with unsettling purpose in a new direction, away from the makeshift border. Something about their coordinated movement suggested a deeper, more sinister intent, but he couldn't pursue them as his own position was on the brink of collapse. The situation worsened when members of his team, bitten and infected during the initial clash, turned against their comrades. The betrayal from within their ranks sowed chaos, forcing Harris to make the difficult decision to retreat. "Retreat," he ordered, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. The team fell back under his command, regrouping at a secondary location. Captain Harris called in for heavy weapons and additional reinforcements, his report grim. "We need more firepower. We're not dealing with typical hostiles. They don't stay down," he explained, the stress evident in his voice. As they awaited the reinforcements, the moans from the town grew louder, a haunting chorus that chilled the blood. A new wave of undead, larger and seemingly more aggressive, began to emerge from the depths of Millwood. The horizon was filled with the silhouettes of the undead, moving relentlessly towards the military's new position. The reinforcements would arrive soon, but Captain Harris knew that every minute counted. If they couldn't hold the line here, the undead plague would spread beyond Millwood, threatening towns and cities far beyond. As he reloaded his weapon, his resolve hardened. This was a fight, not just for Millwood, but for humanity itself. The battle for Millwood. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ravaged streets of Millwood, Captain Harris and his team struggled valiantly to contain the undead outbreak. Despite their efforts, the sheer number of attackers continued to swell, pushing against the military's defenses with relentless ferocity. It seemed only a matter of time before the undead would breach the perimeter completely. Just as Captain Harris was about to call for a full retreat, the distant rumble of heavy military vehicles signaled the arrival of the reinforcements he had desperately called for. The convoy rolled in, equipped with the kind of heavy weaponry needed to turn the tide. Among these were M134 miniguns mounted on Humvees, capable of firing up to 6,000 rounds per minute, each round a 7.62-51 NATO cartridge, designed to cut down even the most resilient of targets. Additionally, there were M2.50 caliber machine guns, renowned for their power and reliability over long ranges. As the vehicles took position, the air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire. The miniguns spun up, unleashing a torrent of bullets that mowed down the advancing undead with brutal efficiency. The .50 calibers thudded rhythmically, each shot precise and lethal. The undead, though numerous, were no match for this onslaught. They fell in droves, their numbers finally beginning to dwindle. Captain Harris watched the carnage with a mixture of relief and resolve. "Now let's go into town and clean up, and hope none of them escaped," he ordered, signaling his team to advance. With the heavy weapons providing cover, the soldiers moved through the town, clearing building after building, their movements methodical and efficient. Each cleared area was marked, each encounter with the undead resolved with swift finality. "Clear," Captain Harris finally declared after a grueling and terrifying ordeal. The town of Millwood, though scarred and desolate, was reclaimed from the clutches of the undead, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, a small group of about 20 shambling undead, led by the one called Adam, returned to the secluded laboratory of Stephen Lestat. They moved with an eerie purpose, their actions coordinated and unyielding. As they approached, Stephen greeted them with a morbid satisfaction. "Good. You have done well, Adam. Now it's time for the next step." Lestat's lab was a hive of macabre innovation, filled with apparatuses and chemicals that seemed more at home in a horror story than in the realm of science. "This new transformation process will enhance you all, my children," he explained with a twisted enthusiasm. "It's time for the Age of Bone." The undead gathered around as Lestat prepared his new formula, a concoction designed to fortify their skeletal structures, making them harder to destroy and capable of withstanding even heavy gunfire. "You will become my invincible legion," Lestat proclaimed as he administered the treatment to Adam, who accepted the transformation with a silent, unsettling acceptance. As the process took hold, the changes were immediate and grotesque. The undead's bones thickened, their forms becoming more rigid and formidable. Lestat watched, his eyes gleaming with madness and pride. The Age of Bone had begun, and with it, a new chapter in the dark saga of Millwood. The rise of the Bone Legion. The transformation was complete. Under the dim, flickering lights of Stephen Lestat's necromantic lab, the undead, once mere shambling carcasses, now stood as towering figures, encased in thick, calcified bone. Lestat's groundbreaking, yet grotesque gene therapy had altered their very structure, turning their flesh into a formidable bone armor. The sight of these new warriors, each covered in rugged, spike-studded bone, was nothing short of nightmarish. "We will create a Bone Legion, and nothing will stop us. Necros, your will is done," Stephen Lestat exclaimed, his voice echoing maniacally through the stone chambers of his underground lab. His creatures, now devoid of any remaining shred of humanity, stood ready, their new forms a testament to Lestat's dark genius. Meanwhile, Captain Harris and his team, having secured Millwood, breathed a sigh of relief. Short-lived, however, as reports began flooding in. Neighboring towns and villages were being overrun by the undead. The contagion had spread far beyond their initial containment efforts. "We need to ensure it doesn't reach a big city," Captain Harris stated grimly, his mind racing through the logistics of what was quickly becoming a nationwide crisis. A full-scale military operation was swiftly put into place, with precision and urgency, as reinforcements and heavy weapons were called in. High up in the military chain of command, Commander Lewis was swamped with reports from multiple locations about the undead overwhelming local defenses. Pulling heavy weapons teams from across the country, he diverted them to the critical areas, pooling together all available resources in a desperate bid to stop the outbreak. The country was put on full alert, and strict lockdowns were enforced in an effort to curb the spread of the horrifying plague. Back at Lestat's lab, the necromancer worked feverishly, driven by a mad vision of domination. As more small groups of undead arrived, driven by some unseen call to his dark sanctuary, Lestat enhanced them with his horrific bioengineering. The newly transformed bone creatures sprouted additional spikes and terrifying anomalies, their bone structure hardening to an almost indestructible density. Each new creation was more horrifying than the last, growing into twisted forms of Lestat's design. The Bone Legion was unlike anything the world had seen. As they marched from the depths of Lestat's lab, they embodied a new level of terror, a force seemingly unstoppable by conventional weapons. Their presence signaled a new phase in the undead uprising, a sinister evolution that threatened not just the immediate area, but the very fabric of civilization. Commander Lewis, realizing the gravity of the threat, coordinated with international allies, sharing intel and seeking any scientific insights that could lead to a countermeasure. The global community watched in horror and disbelief as the situation escalated, a dark cloud of fear settling over the world as it faced an enemy that was both relentless and seemingly invincible. Desperation and descent as the sun set, casting long shadows that seemed to foretell the darkening plight of the nation. The situation reports flowing into Commander Lewis's command center grew increasingly dire. Cities along the East Coast, previously believed to be well defended and prepared, were now succumbing to the relentless advance of the undead. Despite the effectiveness of the heavy weapons in containing outbreaks, the sheer volume of the infected proved overwhelming. Teams dispatched to handle the situations were too few and too late. The undead were spreading faster than they could be contained. Soon the entire East Coast will be infected, a concerned intelligence officer reported to Commander Lewis, the weight of each word sinking like a stone in the quiet room. From the back of the room, a voice cut through the murmurs of strategizing officers. "What about nukes?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the speaker, a senior military strategist with a reputation for extreme measures. Commander Harris, who had been coordinating ground responses, turned sharply, his expression a mix of disbelief and outrage. "You want to nuke our own people?" he challenged, his voice tight with emotion. "They're no longer our people," the strategist replied coldly, his eyes fixed on the maps displaying the spread of the infection. As urgent calls and reports continued to flood in over the emergency network, towns, and now major cities overrun, each fallen city bolstering the ranks of the undead, there was a palpable sense of desperation in the command center. Discussions about possible nuclear intervention, once unthinkable, began to gain traction among some as a viable last resort. Meanwhile, in the eerie calm of his necromantic lab, Stephen Lestat stood looking into the night, his arms held wide as if embracing the chaos he had unleashed. "This is your time, Necros," he whispered into the darkness. As he spoke, the air shimmered, and the image of the god Necros, immense and imposing, materialized in the night sky, overlooking the land with a gaze that seemed to pierce through the veil of reality itself. Lestat's smile widened as he observed the spectral vision of Necros, feeling a surge of vindication and power. The god's presence, a manifestation of Lestat's dark will and necromantic energies, served as a beacon to his creations. The undead, driven by some unseen force, moved with renewed vigor, spreading further and faster, drawn to the energy of their patron deity. Back at the command center, the debate raged on, with the possibility of nuclear strikes being seriously considered. The ethical implications were staggering, but with each passing moment, the situation grew more desperate. Commander Lewis, faced with the potential collapse of civil order and the loss of millions of lives, found himself at a crossroads that would define the future of the nation and possibly the world. As the night deepened, so too did the crisis, pulling the threads of humanity further apart, weaving a tapestry of horror and despair that threatened to engulf the very soul of civilization. Elders in the shadows, months after the undead plague had swept through the nation, turning bustling cities into ghost towns overrun by the relentless dead. A hidden enclave of the elders convened deep beneath the ruined landscape. The sage, an ancient and wise vampire, far older than the others, called a council of his peers. The underground chamber, lit by flickering torches, cast long shadows over their somber faces. "The world teeters on the brink of an eternal night, not of our making. Should this new plague consume all, we shall starve," the sage began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "We need to act now." He turned his age-old gaze upon Varric, one of the more daring and resourceful among them. "Varric, take a small team and see what can be done to stop the spread of this plague." Varric, along with Alara, a fellow elder known for her stealth and cunning, took to the desolate streets of the city. To the masses of shambling undead, Varric and Alara were invisible, their own undead nature cloaking them from the diseased creatures that now populated the world above. As they navigated through the ruins, a commotion caught their attention. They slipped through the shadows toward the noise and discovered a group of humans cornered by a relentless wave of undead. It was clear from the desperate looks and dwindling ammunition that these survivors wouldn't last much longer. Seeing an opportunity to act, Varric utilized his unique abilities. His shadow form swept through the undead, his presence disrupting the unnatural forces that sustained them. Each undead he touched collapsed into dust, their connection to the necrotic energy severed. Revealing himself to the beleaguered humans, Varric was met with gasps and raised weapons. "I need to drink. I need living blood to sustain this fight to free you," he explained, his voice calm yet urgent. "I will only take what I need. You do not have much time." Mia, a young woman with fierce determination in her eyes, stepped forward. "Do what you must," she said, offering her neck bravely to Varric. After feeding, his strength replenished, Varric returned to the fray with renewed vigor, clearing a path for the survivors to escape. As the survivors fled toward their camp, Varric and Alara made their way back to the sage. Upon their return, they recounted their encounter. The sage listened intently, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "We have been here before," the sage mused, his voice tinged with a sense of unease. "Something is not right. This cycle, this endless battle between life and undeath, it hints at a deeper manipulation. We must delve further, uncover the truth behind this calamity." His words hung heavily in the air as the council pondered their next move. The sage's intuition rarely led them astray, and the feeling that they were pawns in a larger game was unsettling. As the elders regrouped, their resolve hardened. They would not only fight to preserve their food source, but also to uncover the puppeteer controlling the strings of this global disaster. The Fall. Commander Lewis stood at the command center, a makeshift fortress that had once been a beacon of hope and coordination in the fight against the undead plague. Now it too was under siege. The sounds of the undead pressing against the barriers, a constant, chilling backdrop. His face set in grim determination, Lewis issued the order that he had hoped never to give. "Evacuate. This position is overrun. We need to move to more secure locations. This place is lost." As the undead spread faster than any containment efforts could manage, the realization that they were losing the battle was heartbreakingly clear. Across the nation, similar scenes unfolded. Once secure military bases, research facilities, and refugee centers fell one by one to the relentless tide of the undead. The world, as humanity had known it, was rapidly disintegrating under the weight of the undead plague. The infection spread with horrifying efficiency, infiltrating every major city and quiet town. No corner of the globe was spared, and within months, what remained of humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction. Survivors, driven by desperation and the will to live, established small camps of resistance. These were often located on the outskirts of infected areas or deep within old military bunkers, anywhere that might offer a semblance of safety. These enclaves became the last strongholds of human resilience, scattered and isolated, yet united by a common goal of survival. The world outside these fragile sanctuaries was a ghastly vision of what had once been. Cities, once bustling centers of culture and commerce, were now overrun with hordes of the undead. Skyscrapers stood as tombstones in a graveyard, stretching as far as the eye could see. The streets below them teeming with the ceaseless, aimless motion of the dead. In rural areas, the plague was just as merciless. Farms and small communities that had once been the heart of the country's breadbasket were now silent, save for the groans of the undead. Forests and national parks, once escapes for peace and natural beauty, became haunting grounds for predators of a new and terrifying kind. Humanity's plight was dire. Communication between groups was sporadic and fraught with danger. Each broadcast over the radio carried the dual hope of connecting with other survivors and the fear of attracting unwanted attention from the undead. Resources were scarce, and every supply run was a perilous venture into a world that no longer belonged to the living. As Commander Lewis and his team moved to a new location, a fortified underground bunker designed as a last retreat, the weight of their situation was palpable. The bunker, equipped with long-term survival facilities, represented one of the final plans laid by governments, now crumbled. Here, Lewis and other leaders planned to coordinate a counter-offensive to reclaim their world, or at least preserve what was left of humanity. The helplessness felt by those who made it to these refuges was overwhelming. Yet, amid the despair, there was also a burning ember of resilience. For as long as they breathed, they would fight, holding on to the belief that humanity could endure even this darkest of times. Cycle of eternity. Atop a secluded hill, far from the chaos that had engulfed the world, the sage sat in quiet contemplation, known among the elders for his profound intellect and rumoured to possess a supernatural sense, a sixth sense for foreseeing future events. He now faced a puzzle that seemed beyond even his extensive capabilities. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson glow that painted the sky with the colours of fire and blood, a figure approached. The sage's eyes, sharp and discerning, recognized the gait and presence of the man even before he could make out the distinctive chrome mask covering his face. The man known as Winter settled beside the sage, his mask reflecting the dying light. "I have done everything possible, but things are returning to how they were," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion and a deep, resonant fatigue that seemed to echo the weariness of the world. "I have sensed this," the sage replied, his voice as calm as the still air around them. "A cycle, a loop, endlessly repeating. We are bound to this fate, it seems." Winter turned to face the elder vampire, his mask hiding any expression, but his voice revealing his frustration. "I cannot do this again. It seems the balance is forcing the fate of this world into the same conclusion, over and over." The sage nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon, as if trying to read the secrets of the universe in the twilight. "How many times do you think this has happened?" he asked, turning his gaze back to Winter. "Just once, I think," Winter replied after a pause, the weight of centuries evident in his tone. The sage remained silent for a moment before responding. "But of course, this loop may be part of a larger loop, where we are reset, our memories of events erased, so we see each loop as one." Winter contemplated the sage's words, a chill running down his spine despite the calm evening air. The idea that they might be actors in a play written by the cosmos itself, their roles destined to repeat ad infinitum, was a thought more terrifying than any undead horde. If we are indeed caught in an infinite cycle, the question becomes, can we break it? Winter mused, his voice low. And if so, at what cost? The sage looked towards the darkening sky, where the first stars began to twinkle faintly. The loop continues because we have yet to find the correct path out of it. Each cycle is a test, a challenge to understand the very fabric of reality and our place within it. Perhaps we have been approaching it incorrectly. Maybe it is not about fighting what comes, but understanding why it comes. Winter nodded slowly, the implications of the sage's words sinking in. The cycle of rebirth and destruction might not be a curse, but a chance, an opportunity to learn, to adapt, and eventually to overcome. As the night enveloped them, the two figures sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts about the cycles of time, the nature of reality, and the possibility that somewhere within the endless loop lay the key to salvation, not just for themselves, but for all of existence. The precipice of eternity, on the precipice of an uncertain future, as the shadows of night deepened around them, Winter and the sage contemplated the monumental task before them. The world of Crimson Dawn, caught in an endless loop of chaos and resurgence, teetered on the brink of a precipice that seemed insurmountable. The question loomed large in the cold night air. What could possibly change the world and break the cycle of Crimson Dawn? Winter, once a man of science transformed by the trials of countless realities, now faced the ultimate challenge. Alongside the sage, whose ancient wisdom had seen the rise and fall of empires, they pondered the paths laid out before them. The combined power and intellect of both brought them to the cusp of potential breakthroughs, yet doubts lingered like spectres in the dark. Does even our combined power and intellect have what it takes? Winter mused aloud, his voice barely more than a whisper against the howling wind. The sage, ever the philosopher, turned his gaze to the stars, seeking answers in their ancient light. Perhaps. The sage finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of ages. The solution does not lie in power alone, nor in intellect, but in understanding. We must comprehend the very essence of this cycle to break it. We must learn what drives it, sustains it, and ultimately, what can end it. As they delved deeper into their discourse, the concept of peace emerged as a beacon in the tumultuous storm. Can peace ever be earned in the world of Crimson Dawn? Winter asked, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. The sage responded with a measured tone. Peace is not earned, but cultivated. Like the calm after the storm, it comes when the conditions are right. We must create those conditions, align the forces at play, and guide them towards harmony. It is a monumental task, yes, but not impossible. Their dialogue continued into the night, ideas flowing like rivers meeting the sea. Plans were made, strategies formed, and by the first light of dawn, a new resolve had taken shape between them. They would attempt to realign the energies of Crimson Dawn, to balance the scales that had so long tipped towards chaos. As the season finale approaches, the stakes are higher than ever. The journey of Winter and the Sage reaches its climax, where the potential to change everything hangs in the balance. Will they uncover the secret to breaking the cycle? Can they usher in a new era of peace for Crimson Dawn? Find out in the gripping conclusion of this epic saga. Coming soon, the fate of a world hangs in the balance, and the final chapter promises revelations, resolutions, and perhaps the rebirth of hope.
Greetings, dear viewers. I am Stephen Lestat, humble scientist turned master of the undead. First and foremost, allow me to extend my deepest gratitude for tuning into the Crimson Dawn series. Your support fuels my dark experiments. You see, my journey to become a necromancer is no simple feat. Under the guidance of the great Necros, I've summoned the undead, faced unspeakable horrors, and brewed more potions than I can count. And it's all been for you, our cherished audience. So, as you enjoy our sinister adventures, don't forget to subscribe. After all, even necromancers need a loyal following. Together, we shall conquer all. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, The dead do tell tales, if you know how to listen. Until next time, my friends, the Crimson Dawn awaits.